Hello and welcome to the Alpha Anywhere Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software. I'm pleased to present Dion McCormick, our lead solutions engineer. No relation, by the way, but great last name. Today, Dion will be covering some more about lists, but we're also here to take your questions. So you could type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. All right, so let's get started. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
Let's see, get there and show my screen, and hopefully we have a clean screen today.
You have a clean screen. It's coming through, and the audio is good. So
Dynamite, yeah, good.
well.
Nice to have a wired connection. Always very, very helpful on that. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. We always enjoy your company, and first and foremost, we enjoy your questions. So, in fact, this question we're going to do a little demonstration came from last week's webinar, but we also received another great question through guides@alphasoftware.com, and we'll be talking about that today. But remember, you can also go ahead and go to your Q&A portion and ask your questions there, and we'll do our best to address them in our meeting today. If we can't, we will, of course, follow up and try and get those done so we can keep you moving along and keep you happening. So today I've got a really interesting presentation. It's on the list control. It's expanding its capabilities. It solves one of those really thorny little problems, and it does it in a very simple and elegant way. So if you have questions as I go through this, please take time to go to your Q&A, put the question there. Dave will be watching it. Is Sarah? Yeah, and we'll be watching and making sure that everything goes smoothly today. If not, this is probably what it's going to look like, just to let you know. So I'm hoping we get to avoid this today, Dave. I don't know if you saw it yesterday, but this was that Starship SN9 test they did yesterday. Everything looked good until that last, 300 feet.
Oh yeah.
It
Now,
was pretty impressive.
is that when they were trying to land the rocket module, or is that
Exactly?
That was
They have the new version.
landing,
Yeah, the bigger one, and it was crazy.
So, in fairness, they got it half right. I mean, the thing went up in the air, right?
Yeah, it's just they tried to land on one engine, really need to. That's a problem. So anyway, we're going to try and avoid that. Last couple episodes of our webcast, this is kind of how parts of it.
Normally that would be horrifying, but they tend to blow stuff up all the time now. Well, fortunately, no people are on board. So.
No, fail fast. It's really a good way to go. So I am really hoping and looking forward to when they actually finally stick the landing on that thing. It'll be a lot more impressive. But you got to consider they're trying to take a 16-story tall building and land it on top of a hot rocket exhaust. I mean, crazy engineering. It's pretty amazing stuff. So anyway, into our presentation today. So towards the end of our webinar, there was a question about when you're doing a list control, usually you bind them to a table, and that's the normal method. And then you could edit the records in that table. But one of the issues one of our loyal listeners came across was the fact, well, what if that table has foreign keys to other tables? It's a classic design structure. Like you may have an order table, and in there you may have a customer ID, and you're storing the ID, but that's a numeric, and you want to be able to actually display a textual version of their name to the person viewing the grid. And we talked about it, and traditionally, sometimes I've used views. I've created a view in the database and linked it to there, or in the grid, and also the list control. But the problem with that is now, okay, when I want to edit that record, how do I do that and other things? So you kind of trade one problem for another. Well, in reviewing it, there was one method, but there's actually a new method called the Decode method, which is really simple, very easy to implement. And I'm going to show you here how you can take a table which has foreign keys, link it to those foreign keys, and have everything displayed nicely in a single format. And it's literally click, 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 super easy to do. So we're going to go through that today. And if you have any questions, drop them in our questions thing. We'll make sure we try to answer as many as possible. So I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and put in a UX component, because again, lists are components or controls that are in UX components. Very important is that, if you are starting out now, focus on lists versus grids. Grids are great. They continue to do amazing work. They're fine, but they have certain implementation issues. They're not very responsive. They don't have as much flexibility and power in terms of offline, etc. So definitely you want to move towards lists. Again, grids are fine, but try to use lists. And again, you'll see even in this demonstration, a lot of work has gone in by the development team to make lists even easier to implement. So I'm just going to first put in a panel card because I like to have a panel card in here. And then inside my panel card, I'm going to put a list control. So I'm going to use the new add control functionality. I'm going to type list, and here is my list control. And I'm going to say list orders. So I'm going to create a list of orders that are, and the orders have information from other tables in terms of foreign keys. So this is a great example where, you know, you're not storing in your order table all the customer data and information, who the employee who's took the order in terms of their name and stuff. You're usually creating a ID column for those other sources and using that. So, oh, FYI, before I do that, real quick, I wanted to show you, for this demonstration, I have created an AE demo Northwind with SQLite using the built-in function. So you'll be able to recreate this or reuse it. You can see it's pointed to a certain location on my machine. You can just create your own and be able to do that there. Cool. So let's go back in here. I'm going to go ahead and add my list control. And you know what? That list control is going to be called list orders. So we'll put that in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the quick setup because I like Alpha to do a lot of the work for me. So I'm going to click here on list control quick setup. And this brings up my setup genie, which walks me through a series of questions, just kind of configure my list. It saves me a bunch of steps in terms of having to go back in and tweak a bunch of things. So first, it's asking me, where am I going to get my data? So I'm going to use the database as my source. So I'm going to select that connection string I just showed you, a demo Northwind. I'm going to use fields from table, but remember you could use your own custom SQL. It's really up to you on how you want to approach on that. And then let me go ahead and do one thing real quick, and we'll do not deserve. Okay. Then we'll go to table name, and I'm going to use orders. So when I connected it through the connection string to that table, it can inspect that. And you'll notice in here, I'm showing two things. I'm showing tables and views. So if I only want to see tables, I'll deselect views here, and you can see I only see views, or I'm sorry, orders or tables. If I want to see views, I can do that. Now, remember, you can build lists off views. There's no reason you can't. And maybe the way you want to go, maybe it's already simple. The view already has all the linkages, all the foreign keys, everything's set up and ready to go. You just use that. The only downside is that if you're editing data using the list control and you attach it to a view, that may not work. You know, there's certain, you know, given the database structure you're using, the database, et cetera, you may not be able to update and edit rows in a view. Sometimes you can, some you can't. So to be safe, the best is to really use a table as that source. So that's why we're doing that there. Now the field list, I'm going to go ahead and select a few things here. Now you'll notice I've got order ID, customer ID, and employee ID. So this is a classic example of, you know, foreign keys. We're not actually storing the customer information in the order. We're just storing a pointer to it, and it's a unique ID for that customer. Same thing with employee ID. It's a unique pointer. But order date is part of the table, and I can maybe put required date in there. So I'm just going to select a few of them here. I could filter this, I could order it, etc., create a detail view, but really all I just want to do is demonstrate how we can quickly show the user interface to the person. So I'll click OK. This will create my list. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'll go list, decode, webinar, or UX. And I'm going to do one other thing real quick before I show it. I'm inside of a panel card, so I'm going to go over here to the right. I'm going to find the list properties, and you'll notice that when it defaults, it goes to a certain height and width. But in my case, I can say fill container, and that will go ahead and expand this to fill that container. And that's definitely different from a grid control. A grid control is sort of a width and height, and that's how it works. But with a list control, it is responsive, so it'll expand its size to fill that container. And if that container changes, like whether it's on a phone or a tablet or a desktop, it's going to automatically figure all that out for you. Very handy, very straightforward to do that. So I'm going to do one other last thing before I show you. I want to go here to properties, and I want to go ahead and use the compact theme. It's using the alpha blue theme, but I want to use compact, so it presents really nicely on the screen. We can see a lot of information on them. So now we've got all that done, we can do working preview, which will use the internal browser to kind of do it, and there we go. So as you can see, we're seeing those columns that I selected, and we're seeing the raw data from those columns: order ID, customer ID, employee ID, order date, required date. And you'll notice for both customer ID and employee ID, for customer ID, it's putting in their customer ID, which in the case of this database is not a numeric, it's a character. But I want to show the full name of the customer. You know, it's a little bit, maybe I'm new employee and I don't know necessarily there. So the next here is employee ID, and employee ID is a numeric because in the other table, it is a number. And in fact, I can show you that real quick by going to Tools, Database Explorer. I'm going to add my connection string in there. And now I can actually go in and look at the tables here. Let's look at orders. And you can see that order ID is numeric, employee ID is numeric. And if we go into employees, we can see, oh, okay, here's the employee ID, it's numeric, but maybe I want to show the last name. So this Database Explorer is nice if you want to just jump in there and take a look at stuff and see what's going on from there. So let's go ahead and first we're going to go back in here. And what I want to do is let's focus on employee ID. Instead of showing a number, now I want to show their last name. So I'm going to go into Design. I'm going to go ahead and go to Controls, and I'm going to reopen my list of orders. And I can do that two ways. One, I can double click here, or I can click over here on List Properties, and that will open it up. So we'll go in here, go to List. So we have our data source. This is where we kind of set up where we're getting our data from. Our fields, List Properties, which there's tons of them, how to work, and then our layout. So I really don't need to change my layout. That's all good. I may want to change headers and stuff. But what I want to do is I'm going to go to Fields. And in here, we kind of manage how does the list work with a field. So the idea is here is the stuff coming back from the database, but now we have a whole bunch of really powerful capabilities to say, when you display this information, do the certain things. So for instance, encrypt the field. Maybe you want it encrypted, like it's a password or a social security number or something like that. What are some formatting issues? Like, do you want style or display formatting, etc.? So the idea is you work on those, and then when you get to the list layout, it uses that to lay it out on the screen, but how it, what the content of each item is taken care of by our fields here. So I'm going to scroll down here, and you're going to notice towards the end of the list of properties, we have something called decode value. And that's the magic little switch that's going to make all this work for you without having to do any heavy duty coding or any work like that. So I'm going to go ahead and click decode value. When I do that, it's going to pull up or add a new parameter called decode lookup list. And that's where we can establish, well, how are we going to decode that value, whether it's character or numeric, into something else. And so I'm going to click on here and it opens up. And so you'll see we immediately get a question of, well, okay, how do you want me to decode this? And there's different ways you can do it. First is static. So if I can go in here and say 1 is Tom, 2 is Jane, etc. So if you had more of a fixed set of codes, they weren't changing anytime, they were done. This is easy, put it in there, it works great there. But the problem with that is that anytime you add a new employee, you'd have to go in and edit this and add those new static values. Not very convenient and not very helpful. So your second option is called dynamic. You have a third option called JavaScript, where it runs a little JavaScript code, which allows you to then on the fly look up that information. And there's other reasons I'll talk in a little while why you would do that. But most of the time you're going to use this dynamic because that one's the easiest to implement. So I'm going to click dynamic. So now it's asking you, great, okay, we're going to do dynamic. What kind of dynamic? So as you can see, we have database query or custom. Database query is probably the one you're going to mostly use. It's going to actually use a database query back into the database to load up and kind of do that decoding for you, that foreign key relationship. Custom, this is very powerful because you could actually define a XBasic and it will call that XBasic to decode the values. And that's really cool. Like for instance, if let's say these codes are associated with a third-party API, you need to call that API to go find that information. versus having it in a database table, you could use that method in here to do that. So I'm going to just use database query. So it's going to go through the classic, what is your connection string? And we're going to select AA demo Northwind. So we're pointing to the same database. It's asking me, well, okay, now what table should I look up to get that decoded value? So in our case, we're doing, oops, I'm on the wrong one. My apologies. I need to be on employee ID. That's the one I want to change. So we'll just go in here, click on here, do dynamic, go in here, select connection name. Now we're where we need to be. So we're doing employee ID, so the employees are in the employee table. So I'm going to tell it to look up in the employee table, right there, employees. And then it's asking me two questions. One, which column in that other table is the coded values, i.e. the foreign key, that special thing where I'm going to go. And basically it uses that to look up and return the information from that other table. So I'll go here and we need employee ID. That's that unique identifier in that table. And it doesn't have to be the ID. I mean, if it could be an employee, like maybe there's an employee number or something else that you can use. You're not limited to use the actual primary key of that table. You can use whatever you'd like from that standpoint. Now the question next is, okay, great. We know you want to get the employee ID. That's how you're going to, but what information do you want me to actually present? So we'll go in here and I'm going to say, in our case, we want to show the last name of the employee. Great. Now you have one last option here, which is filter, where you can go in and define filters. So if you want to limit that in some way, shape, or form, maybe it's from a company basis, you have multiple companies in here and you only want to look up employees in one area. But if you're using foreign keys, usually that's not a big deal. But you never know, you might have an existing database scenario where you have a whole bunch of duplicates and you have to somehow filter it. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now we have our decode list ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Hold on for 1 second. I'll get this started. And I'm going to click Working Preview. So now you'll notice, voila, in my employee column, I'm not seeing those ID numbers. I'm actually seeing the last name of that employee. So the system behind the scenes, without me having to do anything, for every row, it's looking up that information and bringing it back and putting it in there. So think of it as almost like a fancy view builder. You're creating a view, but you're doing it within it. And the great thing about this is that the next time I render this list, if I've added new employees, new records, etc., that's all going to show here. And so as you can see too, you can it does the sorting based on the new decoded value versus the original. So it's pretty flexible in terms of that. So let's go ahead and just do real quick, just to make it consistent, let's make our customer ID the same. So I'll go in here, gonna open up my list. Now remember, to do any of these adjustments, we want to go to our Fields tab. And then I'm going to go here to Customer ID. And you can see there's a decode value capability. I'm going to go ahead and click Decode Value. I'm going to go ahead and select that to edit it. Again, I don't want to use static because I'm adding customers all the time and my big growing business here. So I want to say Dynamic Database Query. I'm going to select a demo. I want to use the same database. You don't have to use the same database. Maybe you have a master record database, who knows? It really depends on your environment. You're not limited to one. The table I want to look up in is customers. Again, field one coded. Okay, what is that unique ID? I'm going to go search in that table to bring back the information. So in our case, it is the customer ID, which is and you'll notice this is a character, so it doesn't really matter. It's going to figure out whether it needs to do a numeric query or a text query. And then the field that we want it to resolve to is the company name. We click OK. So now we've set up our lookup list where it's going to look up in customers. It's going to use that customer ID to link to it, and it's going to come back with a company name. And again, no need for a filter, but since it's a pretty straightforward little database structure. Okay, click OK. Going to go ahead and save that. And let's go ahead and take a working preview. And you can see now, instead of that cryptic customer ID, you're actually seeing the customer name being representative. And again, Alpha's doing all this behind the scenes, so you're not in a position to have to do it. And it really makes your life easier. This method has been around, but before you had to create a separate list with that information and kind of link it. It was sort of a lot more work that you needed to do and other things like that. But in a release a while back, they added this functionality because it was such a common requirement that you kind of go, oh, I need to, be able to do this. They decided to make it easier and implement it from that standpoint, which is pretty nice from that standpoint. So I'll go in here, you can do searching and sorting. You see it all does that nicely on that. I may now have to change this header. Notice it's saying customer ID and employee ID, just to show you how we do that. We go back into our list control. Now you think, oh, we go to fields and change the header. We don't really do the field formatting, kind of display aspect. That's always done on the layout. The fields is more, how do I want to handle the data within the item? So let's go to list layout. I'll go here to customer ID. And then over on the right, you're going to see here is where you change all of your information of presentation. Like for instance, how wide should that column be? What is the sort column? Sort where? And kind of just to let you know, a sort column, you could have like a hidden column and point to that. Really neat stuff. If I can go in here, instead of customer ID, I can say customer, and that's going to be my heading. Now, also really important is that the list control can do what's called language tags and text dictionary tags. So for instance, in the US, it's customer, but in France, it's a different, you can on the fly, the list control will use those tags to look up and change the representation. It's really handy and nice to have that capability in it because it makes it easy for you to serve multiple audiences in their own native languages and not have to do a lot of coding to do that kind of stuff. But I'm just going to change the heading to customer. I'm going to go here to employee ID. I'm going to go in here and say employee name. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK and working preview. And so you'll now notice it's got employee name and customer. So we've changed those so they look pretty good. One other feature of the header I really, really like, just to let you know, is notice how all this space in here, and maybe I'll have 4 or 5 more columns. We talked about last week, which is very important, is now go to list properties. There is a new feature. Let's see, where is that? I think it's a little bit farther down. Where is that? Fixed and virtualized columns. That allows you to say, for instance, keep the first column fixed. So if you scroll, everything else. So like, for instance, that order ID number or something like that. So remind that. But other one that's really cool too is that if I go here to, let's say employee ID, and I say resizable column and enable that, click OK. I want to show you this. It's just a neat little trick I found. They keep putting these little things in there that are really cool. So, and you'll notice I can actually resize this column. So it looks nice. I didn't implement the fix, but maybe I want the fixed one there. But notice how I can't resize this. But if you enable that resize, it automatically allows you to take and put it, adds that function, takes care of everything for you. Now, obviously, one of the tricks is, well, I'd like to remember that sizing and reload it the next time. I just thought about it. That'd be when I was putting the demo together. I don't know how to do that. It'd be nice to be able to record, oh, the person resized the employee name to be, say, 100 pixels and keep that so the next time you re-render it. But this just at least allows the person to quickly be able to kind of, when they're using it to resize a column, maybe you set a low width of the column. So let's try that. Let's go into list orders. This is a common situation. You really don't know the size of that column. So let's go to employee ID. And I'm going to say the column width is, let's say it's 50 px. So I'm kind of guessing there, and I've set it as resizable. So you can kind of set for a higher level of density. This is kind of the nice feature this allows you to do. So you can see it's a higher level of density. So maybe if you had 30, but then the person can sit there and kind of expand it a little bit till they get what they want and be able to adjust it. So that's why expandable columns are kind of nice and they're easy to handle within there. So quick recap. Before, one of the methods I would use, instead of connecting to a database table, I would connect to a view, but I would limit certain things. Now I would have to worry about if that view is editable or not. I'd also have to maintain that view, etc. Now what I can do is with the field decode value, which again is on the fields tab, you can now go in and put in a lookup list where you basically define another table to go look up that information, and you give it what key you're looking up and the value, and then on the fly, Alpha will do all that for you. Makes it very simple to now just keep it simple. And then everything else within the list is going to work great. You can work on styling and formatting. You don't have to worry about writing a bunch of code, but realize, and this is very important, you could have static and JavaScript, so you have flexibility of how you implement it. And then with dynamic, you have the ability to either use a database query, which is probably what you're most likely going to use, or you're going to use a custom, and the custom would be an XBasic function, which basically opens up the world to do anything you want in terms of populating, doing that sort of lookup for that information, calling an external API, looking up, grabbing a file on the disk and looking it up inside there. So you're never limited in this, and it's really just a matter of setting those pieces up. If you do to go to custom, you'll see the custom name. I'll go lookup, employee lookup, and then the function definition. If I click on here, this is where you would put that information in there, and basically it'll talk to you a little bit more about that function name. And you notice that it has to come back to a CRLF delimited. So if you do that, you have to return basically the code, pipe, the name, the display name, and then a carriage return line feed for every row. And you just return that from the function, and then the system can then take care of it from there. Won't actually change it for this demo here. And so if you're interested in this demo, let me know. I'll give that to the team and go from there. But Dave, at this point, I'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions.
Sounds good. Actually, if you could go back to that dialog box for a second, where you were selecting that table, is it possible to always also select a view, or is it just a table at that point?
Yes.
It says table name, but table is tables and views.
Well, interesting. I'm only seeing table names.
Yeah.
Because I do know views are in this database, so I guess you can't. That's interesting. I would imagine you'd also be able to use a view because it's just a query in there, but maybe there's some inherent limitation on this or something.
Interesting. Yeah, no, someone just pointed that out, that they looked at it and they were like, wait a minute, I'm not seeing my views there. Am I doing something wrong? And no, it appears that they're not actually, they're actually there.
Someone moved your view cheese, pal.
Someone moved the view cheese, exactly, yeah. Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Also, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 excellent questions. They're all over the show here. So, but let's stick with the encode decode thing here for a minute.
Yes.
One question is it better to use this encode decode thing, or is it better to just link in the data source, so that it's there and so that the fields are there? And is there some performance hit because now, when Alpha loads these rows, it has to go out to like another table to figure out what it needs to display?
Yes, the answer is you are going to take a little performance hit, but the big benefit is this. If you link it to a view, it may not be editable. So if I go into list properties and I set up a detail view, and in here I go and put in inline style, inline editing, then you may have a situation where you built a list that shows that view, but then when you go to edit the data, it says, sorry, the database won't let you update or insert or do anything like that because it's a view. There's certain limitations around that. So this is kind of that nice to have when you want to display it in a very nice visual way, but you want to still edit just one data's table's content.
So another kind of cool thing is that you could also, unlike a view, you could use a completely different database or data source when you were linking it in. This might come from a spreadsheet or again, just a whole other database, or
a web API. Maybe I'm calling like a classic case is like medical billing. There's standard medical billing numbers. Well, you can, there are many companies that provide you APIs that give you those official ones from the government, or, maybe you're calling out to get that billing number. And you don't want to worry about maintaining it in your own database, like every night updating that database. This would be an example where, it'll take care of that for you. So that's just one potential reason why you might go down this road. But again, the real key for this is that if you are editing data in the list using the list itself, if you attach it to a view and that view is not editable, then no go.
Then no go. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So at the beginning, you said, listen, I'm making a connection string, but the connection string is going to go to a SQLite database so I can share it all with you. Can you show us how you make that SQLite database?
Good point. Yeah, let me go ahead and in fact, I think I can just do it here. So I'm going to go into alpha DAO connection strings. I'm going to delete this one. Now, when you first launch a workspace and you open up alpha DAO connections, if it's empty or it could have something, but if it doesn't have that AE demo Northwind, you'll see this little link down here. And that allows you, or it's a really nice feature. Alpha just says, click here and I'll take care of it for you. So if you click there, it now gives you, before it would just create a link to it would do two things. There's two improvements. One is it would be a link to an access database. So we always included some sample access databases for this. But now you can pick between Access or SQLite. We're tending to do that a little more. SQLite is a little more portable. It doesn't depend on, it's lighter, faster, a whole bunch of other things there. But you can still use Access and what it will do. Now, the super important thing you can do is if I click here and say, okay, create it, it's going to ask you a quick question. It's going to say, do you want to just keep the database? So we have, pre-made databases that are installed when we install the system. It says, oh, just go ahead and use that one or make a clean copy. So it will actually copy either that access file or it will copy the database, the SQLite file. So you have one just for this workspace. So that connection string will go to it. And therefore, if you modify the data in there, it doesn't screw up your original one there. So I usually say, yes, make a clean copy. Now, when you do the clean copy, if you made any changes to that database, which I highly doubt, then they're not going to be there, or if you've modified data. But I go, yes, make clean copy. It says it's been created. You'll see this is where it put that information in this location here. So it did two things. One is it, behind the scenes, it copied that SQLite. It moved it to a certain location. In this case, in this roaming, and this is kind of just for, like a scratchpad area. Then it created the connection string and installed it. So now that's done. Now I can go in and start developing. You'll notice this will just go find that quote unquote new connection string I made, and everything else works the same. The views, because I've kind of separated it from there. So that's how you do it. Is when you get in, you'll see that little blue line. Once you have created it though, just to be confirmed, if I go here, you'll notice that it doesn't exist anymore because we have that one. If I change the name of this, then it would be there from that standpoint. We recommend this for a couple reasons. One is this actually serves two key purposes. One, instead of you having to go set up a database and everything else, you can do training, you can test, you can play by just having this there. Boom. And it's someone, and you'll see a lot of examples using this there. Secondly, which is very important, is let's say you're running up against a bug. And this bug, you perceive it as a bug and you say, man, if I do X, Y, and Z, this is happening. And it's working on your current database. Well, some of the challenges, you'll report it to Alpha and Alpha will go, yeah, it's hard because we don't have access to your database, it's behind a firewall, etc. What we can do is create a little workspace, create this connection string, replicate the problem. And then when you send that UX in to Alpha, they can create their own connection string because it's the same database, and they can do that on their own machine. So you don't have to worry about sending them a database and making sure they have all the data and stuff like that. Obviously, there's certain situations that won't work, but often you can kind of isolate that bug down to, here's what's going on with this data. Like when I do this, it doesn't represent correctly. So again, this is really handy for training, tutorials, other things like that. It kind of normalizes it. But also very important is that if you're doing bug reports, this is a great way for you to basically create a UX, be able to send the UX in, and you don't have to worry about sending a database and everything else with that. So that's just a little bit more background on that. Good question, appreciate that.
Excellent. And just a clarification on a point that we made before, that while views may not be editable, it would be possible if you're in the same database to do a join. I believe that is in fact an editable way of changing data. So if you'd prefer to do it other than enable and encode and decode, that'd be a reasonable solution as well.
Yes.
All right, another question about encode and decode. Can you show both the coded and the resolved values in the list at the same time?
Good point. And I meant to try this, so let's do it together.
All right.
I think we're getting close to this territory. Keep an eye out for that. So go to fields. I'm going to go to employee ID, and I'm going to go into decode list. In the resolved values, I think I'm going to try this. I think what you can do is like use SQL nomenclature. It'll be a little different from Access. Okay, so you'll see what I did in there is instead of selecting a specific field, I'm putting in a concat station, and that I believe that works with SQLite. It supports concat. We'll know in a few moments. So that allows me to say put the last name dash and then the decoded values. Conversely, so let's see if that works and see what happens. I use that for dropdowns all the time, and I think it just passes that through. Nope, didn't do that this time. Yeah, so I'm not sure if you're able to do that. I'd have to, that may be a feature request of how would you allow yourself to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe is SQLite concat? I forget. Let me go up here. SQLite concat fields. Let's see. Oh, it does not support concat. So again, that's important. If it was like MySQL, I know that would have worked. So it's this. So let's try that. It says this with double bars. So let's give it a try. I don't know if this will work, but we're going to say last name bar ID. Let's see if that works. If not, then have to kick it upstairs to someone who knows what they're doing. No, it's yeah, I didn't like that. So we'd have to find out. We'll find out about that question about it. But it looks like maybe you're just limited to a single one at this point in time, but that would be a great feature request. Let's go ahead and do last name. And just what FY, the way to do that is you go to help, enhancement requests, and an enhancement request. And this will actually send it, or you can get an email and it gives you the directions and everything else to submit those. And we love your enhancement requests.
Terrific. Thanks, Dion.
Thank you.
All right, so we went over building the SQLite database. So we've got a couple more here. So this one's unrelated, but could you show how you could add an action button to a list control so that it could print a report?
Oh, good point. Excellent. Why don't we just go ahead and do that?
You've got a list of customers and you've got a report.
Yeah. First, I need a report. So I'm going to go ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to create a new report. So you'll notice I'm back at the Web Projects Control Panel. I went to Reports here and I'm clicking New. Now I have three types. I can go SQL data source. That's what you'll mostly use, but you could also go right against a custom data source, which is like XBasic command, or transform, which is really handy, but I'm going to do the SQL data source. And again, I'm just going to do a quick report versus the blank freeform or layout. You may want to go these directions for more control, how you want to do it from there, but I'm going to just do a quick report. So I'm going to sit there and say AA demo Northwind, and I'm going to go ahead and do, you know what? Let's try this. Let's do orders. I guess that's just, order details, and I'll include all columns. Okay. So we'll go ahead and move all those over, add a little grouping. Let's just go ahead and put in a nice header, call it order details. So we're going to go ahead and save this. We'll go order details. So now I have this nice little report that if I ever want to see it, I can just run it and we can preview it. And this is what it looks like. Obviously, you want to clean it up, etc. You can do that within the report writer. So now I'm going to go here to list report or list orders, and I'm going to open that up. Now remember, this is our source of data, but you'll notice we also have fields here. And in this, I can add items. So these are the fields that are coming from our data source. Very important. These are all the fields that I've selected coming from my data source. In my list layout, I can actually say I only want to show a subset of that. So you always see all the fields here, but in the layout, you can kind of pick it. And remember, you have the ability to create multiple layouts for a list, so you're not limited to a single layout. So let me go to fields. I'll click add item. Now you'll notice when I click add item, I have a bunch of different choices. Dynamic image, static image, a button, hyperlink, custom control, virtual JavaScript, or a menu. Very handy. There's lots of different things you can do on each row, kind of your own custom pieces there. So I'm going to select button since that was the request. And I'm going to call this report. So now we have a button on here called report. And I'm going to go here to the button type is text, but you can change that. I'm going to say it's image followed by a text. The text is report. And the button image, let's go ahead and take a SVG icon. Let's see. Say, let's look at this here. Let's use that one. Cool. So now I've created my field. Now, as I mentioned a few moments ago, these are all the potential things that can be my view. But if we go over to the list layout, you'll see it's now in my available fields, but not over here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that, and I'll go ahead and put that at the end. I can move it anywhere I want to. So remember, create the field, make it work, then go to list layout and add it there. So let's go ahead and save this, make sure we're on track. So you can see now we have a button on each row, and if I click the button, nothing happens, but it's rendering that button for me on here. So what I want to do is when I click on that, I want to run the report. So I'm now going to go in here. I'm going to go back to my fields. Remember, layout is just showing it. So I can change maybe the header and a few other things like that, but I really can't change the behavior of the button in the list layout. You need to go to fields to do that. So report. So you'll see here's the name. Here's like show hide, so you can show it and hide it based on, let's say, only managers can see it or certain roles. But if I come down here, you'll notice we have an on click event. So this is what actually, when the button is clicked, this is what's going to trigger that. So I'm going to go ahead and click there. And this opens up normally, this is like JavaScript there. But given with alpha, you can do what's called action JavaScript. So what I want to do is define, since we're opening a report, we have a bunch of pre-built features in action JavaScript. So I'm going to let alpha do that for me. So I'm going to click action JavaScript, create and edit that. This will open up my JavaScript action builder. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So I'm going to say run report. Okay. It creates a new one, but notice it's got a little red button or red icon. That means I've created my action JavaScript, but it actually doesn't do anything yet. It's just kind of an empty shell. So now we're going to edit that action, and now we can go ahead and add in our actions. So you can see I can click here, and you see all the potential action JavaScript that's available. So you'll notice one, and I can type in like filter and say report. So I can say open or email a report label or letter layout. So I'm going to go ahead and open that report because that's what I want to do. Now it's asking me, well, how should I open? Well, first, which report? So I'm going to go ahead and click here, and I'm going to say report is order details. I'll come back to this in a moment. It's asking me, how do you want to see it? PDF, or I like HTML because it renders very quickly, but you can still have the ability to create a PDF from it. And it also gives the option to say, print as PDF, export, etc. Now, very important, I'm going to go down here. This is asking me, where do I want to open that report? So in my case, I'm just going to leave it defaulted. I want it to pop up as a window. But if you had another panel card or something like that, you could render it in that panel card. You're not limited just to pop-up windows. So I'll click OK, and I'll go run report. Okay, so all that was to create the action JavaScript that would allow me to run that report. But you'll notice I'm back here and there's nothing in here. I went here and said create edit to create it, but I still am on this point. This window is associated with the on click event. So right now, if I were to say okay, even though I created that action JavaScript, when I clicked on this button, nothing would happen because when you go into on click, it's nothing. So the next thing we need to do is right here, we need to go here and click insert code to run the JavaScript action. The run report is the one we want to do. And boom, now I've attached the clicking of this button to that action JavaScript. And again, there's a better way to do it. You actually go define it over here in action JavaScript, then it's available here. But you can do it all on the fly as I did through this presentation. So I'm going to click OK. So now I've got my new button. It's shown on the screen, and I've got an on-click event that will run that report. So let's go ahead and click OK, save it. Make sure my order is saved. Everything's good to go. Let's run our report in working preview. So I'll click report, and you'll notice there's my order details. And check it out. You can download it as PDF, Excel, Word. You can control this. so people can or cannot do it. But notice how fast that rendered. You really want to try and use HTML when you're rendering reports because it happens very quickly, but you still have all the benefits of exporting in other technologies. And so I click on here. You'll notice in this case, it's the same report because basically I don't have any filtering. So I'm going to go back in and let's see if I can get this to work. So I'm going to go into list of orders. I'm going to go to my fields and go into my onClick event. Now you'll notice this is, I need to actually create or edit that JavaScript action. So I open up here, I'm going to open that up and we have ours. And notice we could do other things. We could hit that report, send them a message, etc. So before, when we selected this, we said, okay, we want this report and this initial view. And actually, when I opened that up and selected it, you'll notice down here, you have SQL filter in order. Now, there's another method you can actually create arguments on reports and pass in an argument, or you can use this. It's really both are very similar. Depends on how you want to structure it here. But I'm going to go ahead and do a SQL filter. And I'm going to say, let's go ahead and say, order ID is equal to list orders order ID. So the idea behind this is when I'm on that row and I click on that row, and I have to make sure this works, we'll see in a moment, but what it'll do is it'll say, oh, what is the order ID for that row? And then it will filter that report that opens up. So I should only see the order details for the order I'm looking at. Well, let's see if that works. And you'll notice that's the command right here. Okay, so we got to go all the way back in. We've changed our action JavaScript. That's why I highly recommend you go over here and you can just click and go right in here so you're not so buried. Once it's here, you can run it anywhere. Let's go ahead and save this and let's see if it works. So now what should happen is when I click that report button, it's going to launch the report, but it's going to pass in a filter. So we should only see 10248 order line items. Voila. You'll notice that it passed in and I filtered that order. Let's go here to 120251. There you go. We're only seeing the 1025 Let's go all the way down here and boom. So as you can see, and then this report could have totaling, formatting, etc. from there. So the action JavaScript is, point and click. You basically tell it which report, where you want to display it, and then you have the potential of passing in a filter condition to allow you to properly filter it from there. So that I know it's a bit long-winded, but I wanted to show you some of the cool techniques, but absolutely you can add buttons, links, images, etc. to a list control. And then once you've added those, and let me just go back and make sure you know where that's at. When you add those fields, there's special types of fields here. Then you can associate JavaScript actions to them, click events, etc. Images like dynamic images, say look at another column, and if it's this, make it like a warning sign. Very flexible, very easy, and in some ways much more flexible now than the grid component was because of all these neat capabilities that are added into it.
Wow, that was really good. Thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Good question.
On to the next couple of questions. Oh, let's address the one. Someone sent us an email about 5 minutes before we started today, and it had to do with session variables. They'd used session variables in previous versions of Alpha Anywhere, back when we called it Alpha 5. And they were wondering, what is the syntax for using those session variables today?
Okay, so first and foremost, the existing syntax will continue to work. It's backwards compatible. And I'm going to go ahead and create a little x86 script. And that would be, let's say I wanted like a customer ID, I would go session.customer ID. So that works, and that will work in your old systems, your new ones, etc. What we've done is we've gone ahead and normalized some of these things to use what's called the context objects. Let me go here, and let me open up.
I suppose I should have backed up a moment and said that these session variables are variables that you can use, and they keep their value from web page to web page if you have multiple web pages in your application.
Yep, and load to load,
and all that. As long as it's in the same session. In other words, the session hasn't expired and they had to log in again.
Yep, absolutely. So absolutely, you can continue using session variables. They're nice. Usually what you'll do is you'll load those session variables up when someone logs in with some information that you can then refer, because that session variable is available in like the list a whole bunch of other places you can refer to that to do like filters and other things like that. Now, when we moved to version 11, we started using what's called the context object. And that was important for IIS and also Alpha Cloud. It's a more formalized way to manage this information. And a couple of changes, like, we used to have a command called, or we do, called A5WS get current user. And again, these commands still work, but this is really the way you should be doing that. Is called context.security.current user, things here. But in here is a context.session. So this is where, this kind of is the official way to refer to session variables and add them, like context session.add, etc. A little more formalized. And again, you don't have to change how you're doing now, but it's a good way to go from there. And this will explain a little bit more of how to get that. It gives you a lot more control over your session variables and things like that also.
So Dion, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Oh, sure.
Sarah Mitchell, who had joined us,
oh,
although
good.
She's been here the whole time. I didn't realize that there were 3 Dave McCormicks listed. I thought I was there twice. So she's here answering questions here in the background. And she said, listen, I've got a better document for you to refer
yes.
to. You see it right there in the chat window. So
much better.
To take a look at. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. Actually, let me
in fact, Dion, delete that link that you've saved. You never use it again.
I've used it for years.
No, you got to get rid of that. It's not current.
Get rid of it. In fact, burn the hard drive that you've saved it on.
Just burn it down.
Done. Get rid of it there. So this is where you go. So for instance, you can go in and get information about session object. And this is where it goes in and talks about, getting the detail about how to use those. So you don't have to, but we highly recommend you start using the context just because you're future proofing your stuff. We're trying to keep it as backwards as compatible as possible, but you never know. I mean, certain things may change. So we want to kind of give you best guidance, and this location would be a really good place for you to check that out. I'm not sure if I answered that question,
awesome.
but
no, I think that's good.
Yeah. If I could add to that, I think I saw the same question come in, and they did reference, they had a little piece of code in there and it had session folders in it. And Dion, if you could just search for a session folder, it's really important for anybody moving forward from Alpha Anywhere,
yes.
Alpha 5, version 11 and older. There is no direct access to session folders anymore. So if you click on session folders are obsolete, those variables are gone. There's no session folder, session URL, and there's also no server settings session folders anymore. So you'll have to update any existing scripts to use the new method, which is linked in here, right in that little red box that says storing files and sessions, and that describes how you can put files and sessions so you can send them up to your users.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, that was the second and very important part of that question. Appreciate it, Sarah. All right, one final question, maybe we'll have time to get to here. And this has to do with using the extended user information system, which is extended user information, which is a feature in the application security framework, where you can keep track of information that goes beyond just simply the email address, username, and password of the user. The question is, what is it, and how do you access that information? Like if you're in a UX, like let's say you kept someone's birthday and you wanted to do a test and say happy birthday if they logged in on the right day. How do you look into that information?
So the store additional user information is, this is where you would go look at it if Sarah hasn't already done this. I'm going to put this in here. The idea is, often before, what you would do is you would look up some information stored all in a bunch of session variables and then have to use that later on.
Right.
Basically, this formalizes that process. So now you can have a special table in your system with what's called user information. You tell the project about it. And we should probably do a more walkthrough of that, because for instance, you can use it like in filters and other things like that within all the components, because Alpha kind of knows, oh, this is kind of where I go get that information. You can use it in XBasic, but also in the units there. But this shows you some examples and stuff, but it's really nice. And it's really a way to like formalize how you store all that other information about your users' profile information that will use to guide your application. So it's a little beyond doing much more in the next few minutes, but this is your location to go see that. Basically, you set up and you tell it where you want it to be. Basically, you tell the project where that information is at. And then once you've done that, there's a standard set of fields that are created, but you can actually add more fields to this. So you can add as many other fields as you want. In fact, you can reuse an existing table in your database. So if you already have a table with this information, you can tell Alpha use that table. The important thing is there's something called user ID. So there's this way for it to look up based when you log in, it says, oh, it's joe@gmail.com or sarah@gmail.com. It uses that to look up the information in your table. So you can tell it, oh, in this case, this is the column you want to look up, that user ID. And then Alpha does all that. It really saves you a lot of coding time because it does all the query building and everything else to get the information you need. And it's very flexible in terms of how it works. And it's built in to almost all the components. So you don't have to actually do a bunch of special stuff. Like when you're doing a query, and we can demonstrate this, you basically can go in and say, user name in this record or in this, table is equal to, oh, go look up this value in the logged in users information, and it will automatically take care of that for you. So it does the two steps of going and finding that information, then building the query to actually then filter the data properly for you. Really handy, saves a huge amount of just management code and scut that you normally needed to do. It's kind of handled within the system there.
Excellent. And in the almost 120 seconds that we have left, and this is when I know you can do, can you make a field act like a button? So let's say like
I think you can.
Double click on a field, I don't know, something like that, make it do something.
Let's go here, okay. Yeah, go in here, go and just put in panel header.
Maybe it's a read-only field that's displaying the user's name, for example, and you wanted it to do something.
Yeah, you can go a text box. Let's say it's a field here called text box. Now on the right over here, I've selected that. I'm going to scroll down and you can see there are a whole bunch of JavaScript actions that are available. Things like on change, on focus, on select, etc. So in here, or most importantly on click, so in here, you can go ahead and add your own action JavaScript, your text, whatever it happens to be, and basically turn that into a button kind of scenario. Now, you got to play with it because it's expecting to enter data into it. So you want to make it read only, as Dave mentioned. But here's where you go to like enable any of those kind of behaviors that occur within that field.
Very cool, thank you. And just one last question. There's a section there called JavaScript, and if you move up, there's another section which also seems to have, on the right side in the properties.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
we've gone over this before, but it's been a little while, so I thought we'd point it out. What's the difference? Why is this touch mouse pointer events and the other one is regular JavaScript?
So this was the traditional when it was a desktop metaphor, mouses and clicks and things like that. When we moved into the mobile world, now you have things like touch, mouse, and pointer events. And so for instance, you have things like swipe. Well, that doesn't exist in the old school world. So you want to try and use this as much as possible, but all the other ones, so for instance, on change, on key up, on key down are available. But you do want to try and use these as much as possible because if it runs inside of a mobile browser, inside of a, an iPhone, Android, or a tablet, then these will behave nicely and it will be able to detect those events.
Wonderful. Great.
Yeah.
Dion, thank you very much. So that comes to the end of our session. Dion, thanks very much for presenting. Sarah, thank you for being there, answering questions, giving us the correct information, as always. I'd like to thank everyone else who attended, and especially those who asked questions. If you do have further questions, go ahead and send them to guides, GUIDES, @alphasoftware.com. We hope to see you at the next Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.